How's it going? I have a problem. Hi, Nick. No, look, I have the privilege to be able to lead the church in Fairbanks, Alaska. I've been doing that since 2016, which is really good. It's been a lot of fun, and we have a really great church there. And all of you guys that aren't part of the church already in Fairbanks should probably come up and visit, and then perhaps be convinced to stay because it's so excellent and amazing and beautiful and perfect. So our theme for this lesson, what we've been talking about, whether it's the big theme of the year, and we've talked about it in the little introduction there, we'll be talking about it throughout the year, is build, right? And so when you think about building and you want to build something better and greater and bigger and so on and so forth, it's one of those things that requires change. It requires us to shake things up, to change things up, to do things a little bit differently, and to make sure that we're kind of in the right zone to be able to actually make the impact, make the changes, build the things that we want to be able to build. And so in order for things to change, we need to change. We need to work on our character. We need to be able to build up ourselves in lots of different ways so that we can change for the better. And there's lots of different ways, right? You could take an introduction like this or a lesson like this. You know, the original prompt was be the change. That was the prompt that I was given as I was preparing for this. And you can go so many different directions about that. And what does it look like to change, and what does it look like to be different? But what I wanted to talk about today is one thing that I think drives us to change in really powerful ways. One thing that drives people to change and makes an actual real impact in the world, and that can, again, change the community, it changes ourselves, changes us personally, changes our community, and then goes on to change the world. And I think it's something that Jesus practiced, and well, I know that it's something that Jesus practiced on the regular in his ministry when he was alive. And the thing that we're going to be talking about is compassion. It's compassion, right? And I think most of us are familiar with the term compassion. But if we're also honest with ourselves, my bet is that you're more familiar with the term passion. We're part of the word compassion. But we're more familiar with the idea of passion than we are familiar with the term compassion. But again, we're going to be talking about compassion today, a thing that drove Jesus' ministry, drove him to do the things that he did, drove him to change the world in the ways that he did. So for just a minute here, I want to, because we tend to be more focused on passion, or we're more familiar with passion, I'm going to take a minute in your little notebooks or just in your mental thoughts or on your phone, just write down, I'm going to give you a minute, write down your passions. What are you passionate about? Okay, take a minute. And I want this to be a little bit of a sharey, discussion-y sort of thing. So if you're willing to share your passion with us, that would be fantastic. We've got an hour, so I don't know how to fill an hour of just me talking. So you guys got to help me out. Okay?
You can start singing.
That would be even worse. That'd be a terrible thing. Not in my passions, singing. There you go. Hope you guys like my podium. Very professional.
Very Alaska.
Very Alaska.
What'd you say, TK?
Well, you did build it.
I did. You're right. Hey, this is our theme in action. I didn't build the case though, nor did I cast the plastic. I didn't really build anything. I just put Tupperware on top of it.
Just materials, you put them together. That's technically building. You didn't saw down the trees.
I like the way you think. I like the way you think, TK. You make me feel good about myself. All right, guys, what do you got? Passions.
Learning, pursuit of knowledge.
Learning, pursuit of knowledge is a great passion. I like that. Sure.
Travel.
Travel. Ooh, I like that. Sure. Yeah.
Sports.
Sports. Cool. Who are you rooting for?
Saints.
Okay. Yeah.
Family.
Family. Sure. Yeah.
Standing up.
Yeah. You, LB.
I'm standing up against injustice.
Ooh, okay. Excellent. Yeah.
I think I'm passionate about peace and unity.
Sure.
I really like that.
Yeah.
Outdoor leadership.
There you go. Yeah. Getting out on the glacier. Sure.
I'm passionate about my life.
That's a good thing. Yeah.
Spending time with family.
Family. Yeah. Kenzie.
Serving, but also like being aware of like people that are kind of like on the outside.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Shay, what's up?
Advocating for
Any other passions?
Working with my hands. And
There you go. Getting the things done, building the things, making a difference. Yeah.
Brandon Sanderson, the best author in the world.
Cool. Yeah, I don't know who that is, but fantastic. Wait, is he the Dunes guy? Nope. See,
I'm not his
I tried.
brother.
I tried. Yeah.
Very passionate with like helping students from the village or
Yeah.
village kids come in to transition to city life,
Sure.
school, things like that.
Absolutely. Very good. Yeah, so there's all kinds of great and exciting passions out there, right? So many different and cool things that we can do. And you know, we live in a society that is passionate about passion. We hear it all the time. We hear these phrases of, you know, you gotta get out and you gotta chase your passion, you gotta pursue your dreams, you gotta turn them into realities, you gotta pour in all your time and energy to make the things that you're passionate about happen in your life. There's a lot of these things. And by only following our true passions can we be our real, authentic selves. And only by pursuing those passions are we gonna be able to experience fulfillment and all those other things. But you know, it's interesting because we talk about passion all the time, and our society talks about passion all the time, but you know what doesn't get a whole lot of airtime? Compassion. Compassion isn't talked about as much. It's not something that's as exciting, and it's cool. You know, I feel like this is not an unbiased group. I think this is a biased group of people when we talk about our passions, because I hear a lot of compassion in our passions. Right, but as we look through the world, often passion is not melded with compassion at all, and there's a total disconnect between the two. And so as a society, it's just something that we don't get nearly as excited about is compassion. So let's take a moment. I want to define compassion for us. What is it? So our English word compassion comes from a Greek root, pathos. Pathos means to suffer. It is preceded by the prefix cum in the language there, and that means with. So essentially the English word compassion means to suffer with. And actually, if you go back now, if we get into ancient Greek, we get into ancient Hebrew, and we're talking about the words that we would best describe as compassion in our English language, the words that they use referred to the bowels of people, right? So in the ancient world, people believed that the seat of emotion and feeling was not the heart as we typically see it today, but instead it was the bowels, the gut, all of those, the loins, those portions of our body. So it's really interesting how that kind of identity of things, or how they identified things, made it seem for them, right? So they saw it, but we kind of get that also, this idea of compassion as being associated with the gut. Because if you ever seen something that really upsets you in somebody's life, some sort of injustice, some sort of thing that just, you see somebody on the fringe, you see somebody that's in need, and you feel a lurch in your stomach. You know, you want to do something about it. You want to come to that person's aid. It pains you to see that person in pain, or it hurts you to see this injustice going on, and so you get this kind of knot in your stomach. That's compassion. That's how the ancient Greeks and the ancient Hebrews saw it. They kind of understood and had a word for it that, again, was associated with the gut. And so think about that list of things that you wrote about, that you're passionate about. And again, I heard so many of them in there. When you think about all of those passions, how many of those passions are motivated by compassion? Because again, the idea of compassion is it's the object of compassion is people. It's trying to right wrong or help people where they're at. Where the goal of compassion, or the object of passion, a lot of times is me. The object of passion is, this is what I want. This is what I want to accomplish. These are my goals. Where the object of compassion, again, is others. It's to help them, to try to get them to a better place, a place maybe where they currently aren't. And so again, passion can be a great thing, but it has limitations. And even when a seemingly outward-focused good passion is something that you're into, it can also become misguided if compassion is not driving it. And I'm going to give you an example of this in Luke chapter 13. So go ahead and turn to Luke chapter 13, verse 10, we're going to look at the Pharisees a little bit and look at kind of this disconnect between passion and compassion. And keep in mind here that the Pharisees were passionate about some things that we would consider good, but there was something missing. So Luke chapter 13, starting in verse 10, it says, on a Sabbath, Jesus was teaching in one of the synagogues, and a woman was there who had been crippled by a spirit for 18 years. She was bent over and could not straighten up at all. When Jesus saw her, he called her forward and said to her, "Woman, you are set free from your infirmity." Then he put his hands on her, and immediately she straightened up and praised God. Indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath, the synagogue leader said to the people, "There are 6 days for work, so come and be healed on those days, not on the Sabbath." The Lord answered him, "You hypocrites! Doesn't each of you on the Sabbath untie your ox or donkey from the stall and lead it out to give it water? Then should not this woman, a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has kept bound for 18 long years, be set free on the Sabbath from what bound her?" When he said this, all his opponents were humiliated. But the people were delighted with all the wonderful things he was doing. So you look at the Pharisees in this story, and they were passionate. And again, they were passionate about something that we would consider good. They were passionate about Mosaic law. They were passionate about, at that time, the Bible for them. They were excited about it. They want to make sure that the law of Moses was kept to a T, but they lacked compassion. They lacked that focus on others. Their focus instead was the underlying theme. They were passionate about the law, but why? They're probably passionate about the law because it maintained their social status. They're passionate about the law because it allowed them to have authority and control and status in people's lives. That was a big part of what was going on. You see that over and over again in Jesus' ministry. He continues to attack them, even though they were passionate about something good. What were they missing? Compassion. They didn't care about people. They didn't have that focus on others. And of course, as we see throughout the gospel, that leads them to a series of more and more horrifying decisions that eventually leads up to the cross of Christ. That their passion drove them to do something terrible under the guise of doing something good. So again, it's something that we have to always be thoughtful about in our lives. Okay, what are my passions? And are those passions driven by compassion? Are those passions driven by actually caring about others? Are my passions about me, or are they about helping the plight of those around us? Interestingly enough, the Bible, the NIV Bible, so the most recent NIV Bible, has 9 instances of the word passion. And 0 of those instances refer to anything good. So, for example, Romans chapter 7, verse 5 says, "For when we were in the realm of the flesh, the sinful passions aroused by the law were at work in us, so that we bore fruit for death." Titus chapter 3, verse 3 says, "At one time we too were foolish, disobedient, deceived, and enslaved by all kinds of passions and pleasures. We lived in malice and envy, being hated and hating one another." So all the instances of the English word passion in the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, refer to something that is not a good thing. But if you look at compassion, on the other hand, again in the NIV, the most recent one, the word compassion, on the other hand, is used 82 times, and most of them refer to God and his compassion for others, his compassion for us, to Jesus and his compassion for people, or to use the word to call us to be compassionate people. So on the other hand, examples. Psalm 86, verse 15 says, "But you, Lord, are a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness." Colossians chapter 3, verse 12, this is the one that's a call to us, says, "Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience." So our God is a compassionate God. And because we're called to imitate him, we're called to be compassionate people. So as you think about your life, would you consider yourself to be a compassionate person? Are you a compassionate person? Do you have that desire, that lurching of the gut, even, for others, that you see them in their need, you see them in their plight, and you want to help for their sake. Not for you and for your status or for your feel-good moment, but because you actually legitimately and genuinely care. Now, I'm not here to say that if you've got passions that are not people-oriented, or if you've got passions that are not necessarily undergirded or driven by compassion, those passions aren't necessarily bad things, right? Travel, for example, can be awesome and exciting, and it could be moved by people and compassion, right? Because you can travel to go help people, etc. So it's one of those things that you think about, right? And I'm not saying even if you just like to go to Hawaii and lay down on a beach and help no one for a day or two, that's not a bad thing necessarily, okay? So I'm not down on your passions and telling you that you're all horrible people and that you need to get your life straight. No. I am saying though that the passions in your life that are driven by compassion, those are going to be the things that are most effective for God. Those are going to be the things that are most effective for your relationship with Him and effective for you to actually go and help people in a meaningful way, to make a difference, as Reese was talking about earlier today. To fill that hole in the soul is what Reese was discussing. So those compassionate passions are going to be the ones that are going to be most effective for doing those things. So if we're going to be compassionate people, then the question is, to whom should we be compassionate? Who are the objects of our compassion? And so to answer that question, we have to go back to the Bible. We have to look at some things to figure out, well, where did Jesus share his compassion? On whom did Jesus share his compassion? And we could do the pat answer thing. We'd be like, everyone. Right? I will be compassionate to everyone. And it's not a wrong answer, to be fair, right? It's not a wrong answer. But who specifically did Jesus share his compassion with most? So let's take a look. Matthew chapter 9, verse 35, I think answers this question in a meaningful way. Matthew 9, verse 35. It says, Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them, because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. Jesus' compassion was directed at the harassed and helpless, the people who are lost like sheep without a shepherd. Typically, when we use this passage to make it mean something about evangelism, right? We get out and we're like, this means that we need to go out and we need to seek and save the souls of the lost, and that's not wrong. But it's only part of the story, because what was Jesus doing as he says this thing? As he looks at the crowds and he sees them as harassed and helpless, and he says, we need workers in the harvest field. What was he doing? He was teaching in the synagogues. He was proclaiming the good news of the kingdom. But he was also healing. We like to separate these things apart. And we like to say, well, okay, this is an evangelism scripture, because he's going out and he's teaching people about God, or he's proclaiming the good news, but he was also healing. He was meeting real physical needs of the world's most hurt and hopeless and disenfranchised and disadvantaged and alone. That's who he was sharing his compassion with. And we're going to get to it later, because the thing is we like to divorce these things and separate them all out. Like, oh, we got the mission part of it, and then there's a serving part of it, there's a teaching part. They were all blended together in Jesus' ministry. While he taught, he served people. While he proclaimed the good news, he healed them. He helped them in very real ways. And so you look around and you look through the gospel of Jesus, who was his compassion shared most with? It was the hurting, the helpless, the alone, the homeless, the prostitutes, the outcasts of society, the lepers, on and on and on and on. These are the people in poverty, the people that were separated from the rest of society. These are the people that he spent most of his time with, sharing that compassion. That's who he was doing and spending his time with. And again, we tend to focus, even when we see the word healing, like he came and healed the people, we focus on, we're thinking in our minds, yes, he brought spiritual healing. Yes, he did, but he also physically healed them. He met them where they were at and met their physical needs. His compassion to help those people drove him to serve those most in need. Another example, Matthew chapter 20, verse 29. It says, as Jesus and his disciples were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed him. 2 blind men were sitting by the roadside, and when they heard that Jesus was going by, they shouted, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us. The crowd rebuked them and told them to be quiet, but they shouted all the louder, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on us. Jesus stopped and called them. What do you want me to do for you? He asked. Lord, they answered, we want our sight. Jesus had compassion on them, and he touched their eyes. Immediately, they received their sight and followed him. When taken to the rest of the context of the whole Bible, Jesus' ministry to the poor makes so much sense. When you look at the context of the whole rest of the Bible, it makes so much sense because the whole Bible is literally packed full of references to helping the poor, the needy, the alone, the disenfranchised, the disadvantaged, the people without service, the people who people don't care about. There was one study that was done that showed there was over 2,000 references to poverty and wealth, to helping the poor and the disenfranchised, to the warnings of greed, etc., etc., etc. Social justice, over 2,000 references. You read through the Bible, it's almost literally on every single page of the Bible. You see examples of people. You go into the Old Testament, we think about the old meanie God, the one that was judgment and fire and all that other stuff. Look and read the prophets, the most doomy and gloomy and horrible, sad, scriptures where they're saying how everything's going to end in fire and judgment because you guys are screwed up. Why? Often the case, the one of the most damning indictments that the prophets have against the people of Israel, they didn't take care of their poor. They didn't take care of the individuals that were alone. They didn't have compassion, and so God brought judgment on them. And so again, you see it spring off the page so often. And again, in our kind of excited, get the word out in evangelistic society, I think sometimes, not society, but even in our church, sometimes we just think about we got to get out and we got to convert all these people and so on and so forth. And yes, we got to do that, but we cannot forget the poor. Cannot forget to have compassion on those that don't have compassion. That society leaves to the outskirts. And again, one of my favorite passages that really drives this home, James chapter 1, verse 27. Many of you are familiar with it. James 1, verse 27 says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after the orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. What is pure religion? Faultless religion. The religion that God our Father accepts, that he wants us to have. It's a religion that we go out and we help the widows and the orphans. Again, in a society in Jesus' time, the widows and the orphans were the worst of the worst off because they had nobody there to help them. And so that's our call today, to go to these people, to have compassion on these people, to help them get to a better place, to deliver services, to do. And you think about it, these things go hand in hand because it says that we should help the widows and orphans and keep oneself from being polluted by the world. And I think those things are very well melded together because when we're going out and we're changing people's lives, we're helping them, we're making a difference in their lives. You know what we're not being? Polluted by the world. Because as we go and we're changing the world, we're not being polluted by it. But you know what happens? When we stop changing the world, we start getting influenced by it. And then it pollutes us. So you want to answer the question, how do I keep myself from getting polluted by the world and all these influences? Well, then be an agent of change in it with compassion. Let the compassion drive you to make a difference in the lives of people. And I'm telling you what, if you go out and you do that and you're excited about that and you go and you see the victories from helping people, you're not going to be polluted by the world. You're going to be too busy changing it. You're going to be too busy making a difference in other people's lives to be affected by all the crap that we experience. And so it's something that the Bible calls us back to over and over and over and over again. And again, what drives us to serve in that way, to impact others through service? What drove Jesus? Compassion. He legitimately, genuinely cared about others. How is your compassion? What does your compassion produce in your life? Is it driving you towards change in yourself? Is it driving you towards making change in the community to help identify and find these people that need help and actually do something about it? Instead of just hearing about it or being, oh man, that's too bad, shucks. Are you actually, is there fruit of that compassion that it's making it a difference? And it's good to analyze ourselves individually, right? And think about, am I compassionate? Am I really a compassionate person? But I think it's good to take it a step farther, right? To think about our fellowship, our church, our congregation as a whole. We're going to build together. That's what we want to do. So how would you rate our compassion as a church? As a whole church body? Are we compassionate? It's just something good to think about. And let me ask maybe a dangerous question or an uncomfortable question. I think one way that we can look at that, think about that, is to kind of measure our compassion is, how many poor people do we have in our congregation? I'll spoil it for you, not very many, right? So what does that say? I'm not saying that we're not compassionate. I'm not saying that we're all screwed up. That's not what I'm saying. But does it give us pause for thought? I hope so. It should give us pause for thought, right? Because if we're going out, we're having compassion on people that are poor and needy, poverty, alone, we would probably see a lot of them come to church. Because as we serve them, we help them see God and experience God. And we show them what Christianity really looks like. So it's an uncomfortable question, I get it. And as a leader of a church, I know that's in large part on me for not directing us to do those things. So it's a really uncomfortable question for me in Fairbanks. We don't really have any poor people in Fairbanks in our church. So it's tough, it's tricky, right? But it's things like this that we need to think about. Again, are we emulating the ministry of Jesus? Are we actually going out and doing that with other people? And it's so easy to think sometimes, and this is not something that we always run into, but I think it's really easy to fall into that trap of thinking that like going out and serving and making a difference and hoorah and yes, I'm doing all these things. It's like that's like reserved for like the super Christian, Like I like to just go to church on Sundays and kind of hang out, someone's got a birthday party, I'm gonna be there, awesome. But man, it's those like really good Christians that go out and they do all that serving stuff, and you know what, I'm part of them, so it's kind of like me going out, I give contribution occasionally, so I'm sure at some point in time that makes it to a poor person. I'm pretty good, but again, the Bible is astonishingly clear. I would even go so far to say that our compassion, our service to the poor and needy and following the ministry of Jesus in this way it's not an optional issue. I would call it a salvation issue. We talk about doctrine and all these things that got to happen. What does one need to do in order to be saved? What does it look like for a Christian to be real? I put service to the community, service to the poor and needy, to the disenfranchised and disadvantaged. I put that right on up there. And I could share a few scriptures. I won't, but there's a few scriptures that point to some very, very terrible consequences. And the only thing that's mentioned that these people did not do was care for the poor. And it's real stuff. It's scary stuff in some ways, but it's one of those things. Okay, are we there? As a church, as individuals, where's our heart of compassion for people to go out and follow the ministry of Jesus, to walk in his footsteps, which will, by the way, as it did for Jesus, lead us to very uncomfortable places, right? Are we willing to do that for him? So now let's open it up then, and I want to have a little bit more conversation. So what stands in the way? What trips us up? Yeah.
Like, it's just kind of hard to navigate like every day living in the city.
Sure.
And then so it takes, for me, it takes like other people leading me.
Yeah.
This is the organization that helps specifically people that need this.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so it's kind of, you're kind of lost in the mix, right? The needs are great and they're all over the place, and it's like, what do I do? Where do I start, right? You need someone to kind of help you out with that. Sure, absolutely. Come to my next class. We'll talk about that. Like my next class is an extremely specific version of what I'm saying now about what we do and what we have done and what we're continuing to do. So, yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, even at a heart level, what are those things that stand in the way? Yeah. Sorry, did you have a thought? I thought you.
Oh, no,
it's cool. No, don't worry about it. Yeah, what's up, Shay?
I think for me, it can be easy to say, well, I work in the service industry, so I am giving back. But really, that's an excuse to not
Sure.
go out and do more.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Letting.
Oh, go ahead.
Sure.
Yeah.
Go for it.
You're older.
Oh man. Oh, gosh. Here we go. Jared, go ahead.
Well then, letting your other passions get in the way.
Sure. Yeah.
And not
Absolutely.
being actually compassionate.
Wanting to go after the things that I want to go after. Totally. Yeah.
All right. I was gonna say like fear one because it's scary. Obviously, just like
Yeah.
talk to people sometimes and just invest your time in your life because you don't know how it's gonna go. And then you've heard rumors of like for poor people they're always drunks or they're like
Yeah.
addicted to drugs and you're like or they have like we say mental health issues or
Yeah.
whatever and you're just like
Yeah.
how in the world like oh my gosh I don't know because if you're poor in Fairbanks like you must be crazy because it's thinking negative 40.
Right. Yeah.
Like, what are you
Yeah.
doing outside?
How'd you get there?
There's
Right.
gotta be something.
Yeah.
But just to know how to really practically invite, and then like even what we were talking about in there, just like trying to be wise in those things, like
Yeah.
like somebody who struggled with like child pedophilia or something.
Right, yeah,
like,
totally.
Like I don't want to invite like
Yeah.
a guy just like with all my sisters. because,
Sure.
Like I want to filter out. Okay, this is like really serious. Before
Yeah.
I invite them into the church.
Yeah.
It's like being able to have safe environments to do that and stuff. So,
Mhm.
but
It's-
also
that's-
just time.
that's a
like,
tricky- it's
'cause
a
when
tricky
you're
thing.
working all the time, like at a job, I'm like, oh yeah, I work. Like this is hard enough to try and
Yeah.
reach out to my coworkers. I don't
Yeah.
have to go out and-
Right. Yeah. Got some other things. Yeah. You bring up the safety thing is an interesting thing, right? Because, and I don't have an answer for it, but my reading of the Gospels and the Scriptures has very little indication that Christianity is a safe faith. And that's just and it's tricky. Yeah. I don't have an answer for that. Yeah. Sorry.
But
it's
speaking with
some
that,
other
like
thoughts,
the
yeah.
safety thing, like how do you feel bringing your child
Yeah,
to
oh,
go
yeah.
volunteer places?
Absolutely. Is this a real question?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking you.
Yeah. How do I feel about bringing
Yeah,
my
like
kids
how
out
do
to
you, how do you work that in? Like
Yeah.
bringing your kid along,
I mean,
so.
my kid is 1 year old and very useless, so I tend not to. But yeah, I mean, as he grows up and he's able to be involved in those sort of things, I don't have an answer. I want to teach him to get out and serve. I mean, the way that I learned how to serve was my mom dragged me out, and I always was like, Mom, why do we have to do this? And she said, Nick, we don't have to serve. We get to serve. And so she dragged me out. But then most of those were fairly safe environments. And so, yeah, I don't have a good, like, clean, like, just put your children in danger, duh, Jared. Like, come on, like. So it's tricky for sure. Yeah.
I think being afraid to feel uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times when you're reaching out to those situations, I'm not an emotional being by nature.
Sure.
And so this is one of the reasons why I'm in this class, is to work on compassion.
Yeah, sure.
But even if I was, I think you still put yourself in situations where you're going to feel uncomfortable,
Yeah.
meeting where they are
Yeah.
and hearing their stories.
Mhm.
And for me, that's what actually scares me.
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
allow myself to feel that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that points back to Casey's thought, right, where we see people on the streets and we make some assumptions about how they got there, right? And that's it's tricky, right, to figure out like how do I or do I care about that? Like that person maybe did it to themselves, right? And like how do I have compassion in the absence of that? Yeah.
I think kind of getting back to the idea of safety is I think we have to be careful about what is uncomfortable and what is
Yeah.
unsafe.
Sure.
Because sometimes
Yeah.
you go, well, that doesn't feel comfortable, so it's not safe.
Right,
Well, it's probably
yeah.
really you're safe.
Yeah.
But I think it's also kind of gets back to the idea of working on yourself as a Christian in the whole.
Mhm.
You shouldn't be just a compassionate Christian. You should be a faithful Christian. You should-
Sure. Yeah,
you
there's
should be
lots of
building
different
your
things we
team.
can be
So,
talking about,
you
yeah.
know, if you're going into these places that you go, you know, it's not really comfortable, maybe a little dangerous,
Yeah.
use your wisdom, you know, that you
Mhm.
develop as a Christian. Go, okay, is it wise to go to take this risk, or is it wise to take that risk? And you know, using the body to go with you and
Right.
having a team approach.
Yeah.
And then having the faith that, you know what, if this is a wise choice and I feel led to this, God's got me. You
Yeah.
know, it doesn't mean you're not going to have an uncomfortable time. It doesn't mean you won't get injured, you know, in the
Right.
mission field
Right.
or whatever. But you kind of have to have that faith of, I think He's calling me to this. I think
Sure.
it's worth the risk
Right. Yep.
within this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's huge. Yeah. Lovely.
I think my problem might be the opposite of James, is that I can feel too much. Like, I guess, like, empathetic.
Sure.
nature.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, you know, there's times where I feel tired emotionally.
Yeah.
And can I give more? Can I? You know?
Right,
And then it's like,
yeah.
you know, and with God, the answer's always yes. But it's like, you know, it's like, but gosh, you know. that's what-
Yeah, there's a certain level of pacing that's required
Yeah,
to be able to
wisdom with that.
do it effectively, right? There's whole industries now that are designed for helping the helpers, right? Because they do that. We drain ourselves at times and get into dark places because we're expending all this energy and so on and so forth. So yeah, this is a good conversation because it's so complex, right? And there's some clear things that I think that like heart level issues that take us away from actually getting out and being compassionate and serving. I think in our society, number one, probably the biggest one, greed. Right? That's one thing that really, really takes us away. Again, this is at a heart level that it's just hard because we are a greedy society. And it's very difficult to break out of that. But interestingly, you know, there's a passage, I think we covered it a couple weeks ago in Ephesians, when we were covering the book of Ephesians. It says Ephesians in chapter 5, verse 3. It says, but among you there must not be even a hint of sexual immorality. Everybody goes, yeah, brr. Or of any kind of impurity. And we're like, bah, yeah. Or of greed. Oh, move right along. Yep. Because these are proper for God's holy people. Right? And then the passage goes on, right? And in verse 5 it says, for of this you can be sure, no immoral, impure, or greedy person. Such a person is an idolater, has any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God. Not even a hint. I think that's a big one. I think the other one that was kind of brought up, not forthrightly, but I think kind of comes up in that is like, yeah, we see all these people, and then we do tend to make judgments or assumptions about kind of why they became they got in the state in where they were. Was it drugs or alcohol or addiction, or they've obviously made bad choices and so on and so forth. And you know, there's a passage that I found very interesting, and this just kind of speaks to the way that the world worked in Jesus' time. But when we make one of those blanket assumptions, we implicitly imply that poverty or being poor or outcast is a result of sin, is a result of something that you've done wrong, and now you are reaping the consequences for that. Poor people are poor because they've done bad things, and not poor people are not poor because they've done good things. They've made wiser decisions in their lives. And if you feel that at times, if you've ever struggled with that assumption, and I am guilty, super guilty, of making that assumption, you're actually in good company, because that's pretty much the entire Jewish religion of Jesus' time. And in fact, there's a story here that I think highlights it. It's Luke 18, verse 18. It says, a certain ruler asked him, good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Why do you call me good? Jesus answered, no one is good except God alone. You know the commandments. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not murder. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony. Honor your father and mother. All these I have kept since I was a boy, he said. When Jesus heard this, he said to him, you still lack one thing. Sell everything you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me. When he heard this, he became very sad because he was very wealthy. Jesus looked at him and said, how hard is it for the rich to enter the kingdom of God? Indeed, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God. Those who heard this asked, who then can be saved? Jesus replied, what is impossible with man is possible with God. And we've heard this story, but have you ever wondered why the disciples reacted this way? Like, Jesus says this thing about how hard it is for the rich to enter the kingdom of God, and the immediately response of the disciples was then, Well, then who can be saved then? You know why they thought that? Because they associated wealth with righteousness, right? So it was completely insane to them to think that a rich person would go anywhere other than heaven, because they assumed that wealth meant you made good decisions, that you were receiving God's blessings. They essentially preached a prosperity gospel in many ways. And so they thought that if you did the right things and you made the right decisions, God would bless you, you would become materially wealthy, or at least not super poor or impoverished, and then you would be good. So everybody else that was poor and impoverished, they did bad things. That's why they're in the place that they were in. But Jesus makes it very clear, like, nope, that's not how it is. So when Jesus tells stories like these, or when he does stuff like that, there's this catch, right? And the catch was the rich person is not going to make it if he doesn't change some things. And they're like that was just something that they did not know how to deal with, right? And so, yeah, absolutely. I think the assumptions that we have can be really, really challenging, and it's an encouragement to me. I've heard the conversations about, if we're going out and we're helping the homeless, are we just enabling them to stay in their state? And I think that's a fair assumption, or not assumption, a fair conversation to have. But I've not had the opportunity, or I've not made the opportunity. Again, maybe this is something I need to work on in my heart, but I've not made the opportunity to get to know any homeless person on a personal level to make a decision about whether or not I'm enabling them. That the panhandler at the outside of Fred Meyer or whatever, I don't recognize that person. Maybe if it was that same person, like for years after, and maybe if I gave that guy $100,000 and then I saw him panhandling the next day, I would have some concerns about enablement. But the reality is I don't know that person. I don't know his story or her story. I've not seen them before. So is it fair for me to make an assumption that I'm enabling them by giving them some money or giving them some food or giving them some whatever? I don't know, man. I'm going to err on the side of just being compassionate. And is it wrong to be compassionate to someone that has made a lot of bad decisions? I don't think so. Right? I've made a lot of bad decisions. I've needed a lot of people to be compassionate to me so I can get through that, right? So there's again, I think that there's a big conversation there about, man, are we making assumptions? Are we being judgmental, and that's why we're not compassionate? And the other thing that came to mind, I was thinking about this, and this is a church issue in particular. I think in church sometimes, again, we're very evangelistic, and we want to get out and we want to seek and save the lost, and we want to make a difference. And so in church world sometimes, then this is real, I've heard these conversations, is, well, if we go and we invest all of our resources in going out and helping all these poor people, then we're not gonna keep growing. We're not gonna be fulfilling the mission of Jesus, that by going out, seeking and saving the lost and baptizing people and helping people make Jesus Lord and so on and so forth. And man, that's just sad when we think that way, because it divorces the ministry of Jesus away from itself, right? We compartmentalize Jesus' ministry into evangelism, service, shepherding the saved, and we don't. It's not blended, but Jesus' ministry is blended. Think about the multiplications of the Lord, of the loaves and fish, the feeding of the 4,000. Right? What was Jesus doing? He went out and he was preaching the good news to these people, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of God. What did he do? He noticed that these people had not eaten in days. He had compassion on them, and he fed them. All of it, all blended together. Teaching, preaching, healing, helping people in real physical ways, happening all at the same time. We don't have the right to do this. Well, we want to focus on evangelism and not serving, or we want to focus on serving and not evangelism. Like we don't do that. That's not Jesus' ministry. Jesus' ministry is all of it, and again, driven by compassion in so many ways to reach people. However, and I would argue that service, when we go out and we serve people that are in need, we are evangelizing. We are helping people experience God's love, maybe for the very first time. You take a group of Christians out and we go serve together, you are shepherding the Christians. You are guarding their hearts because it is good for us. And it keeps us faithful to go out and to serve. I believe that, right? So we can't just, again, separate all of these things out. And so it's difficult for us to, again, avoid falling into some of these traps like that. But when it really comes down to it, we check our hearts. If we really get self-aware about where we're at, we even ask the questions and think about where am I at compassion-wise and where are we at compassion-wise, and we start to do something with that, we're going to go in a better direction. I think it's just at times we just tend not to ask the question. Because tending to ask that question, it's a challenge to the status quo. It makes you stop and think. And we got too many things going on to stop and think, right? We got stuff to do, kids to pick up, and school to have, and whatever, jobs to go to. It's easier just to go with the flow. It's easier just to keep doing whatever it is you're doing than to stop and ask, can I be more compassionate? Can I do more? Or can I do something different in a way that's not burning us out to the point of death, right? Can we be doing something different to be effective for God, to follow Jesus' ministry in this way? And as we do those, we go after them, right? There's so many things that can happen. So many great things that can happen in our personal spiritual lives, in the life of our church. I do believe that it leads to better, greater things for us to be able to build something bigger and greater. So, what do we do with this information? Not rhetorical question. What are we going to do? Yeah.
I was just thinking about serving
Yeah.
the Beans Cafe and things. I've done it all my life, but I just became a disciple 2 weeks ago.
Hey.
I feel like now I can incorporate those differently, not just go there. I mean, go there to be an example, but also to help people. But actually mingling and making
Absolutely,
it that way.
absolutely, sure.
Kind of at that point, like, I just like taking the initiative, but also like doing it with other people. So like the campus stuff helps me, and it honestly helps me feel like less uncomfortable. So
Sure. Yeah.
I
Sure.
feel like I'm more motivated with other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Sure.
Prioritizing it. I mean,
Yeah.
if it's not in your schedule, you're not gonna. Or if you don't
Totally.
make the time.
Totally. We don't make the time, you don't have the time, right? That's like anything for most of us, right? If we don't make the time, you don't have the time. It's not gonna. The opportunities to serve most of the time are not just gonna like pop out into your face, right? As you go along doing your thing. Most of the time, we got to actually make, like Beans Cafe, for example, amazing work that they do. You got to book them out, right? They got lots of great volunteers, and sometimes I've called, like, hey, I got a group to come in, and they're like, yeah, 2 months from now. I'm like, awesome, that's such a great problem that we have to wait 2 months to serve there. That means that you're getting a lot of people volunteering. So, but it's planning, for sure. Planning, prioritizing. Anything else? Other thoughts?
Same thing in like a financial spectrum, like
Yeah.
maybe we put it into our budget that this is not our money, this is the money that we're giving away.
Yeah. Totally, absolutely. And I'm actually happy to say that our budget here. So another thing, if you didn't know, I oversee all of the budgets for the church in Fairbanks, Anchorage, and for the Gateway to the Arctic Camp. And we're at a great place financially in the church to be able to give, right? And we're doing that. We're investing a lot in the Gateway to the Arctic Camp to continue to serve people. You'll hear more about that if you were to stop in on my second class here. But it's actually very incredible what we've been able to do, mostly through the leadership of Ray, who's decided to step down from paid leadership and is now leading without pay. He's a self-supporting minister at this point, which frees up amazing amounts of capital to be able to get out and to serve and to really bolster this ministry of compassion that Jesus has. So yeah, absolutely. But giving financially to support that is huge. Now I think we have to be careful because sometimes we're like, now I don't have to go, right? Like I have done my duty. But so we have to watch our heart. But that's just it, right? So much of this is just checking your heart, right? We can just wrap it into one little point. Check your heart, make sure that you're compassionate, and then we're going to be in a good spot, right? So yeah, financial giving is huge. Yeah, what else?
I think the financial giving, I realized that it's like we would be very careful to watch, like to be careful. I think as disciples, guarding our purity and what we watch on TV, like as far as specific scenes and things like that. But I find myself, I spend some time with my family back home. I realize that HGTV is a very dangerous thing to watch too much. If it even brings out greed, it's something like that, it's like in me, it's like in stuff because I'm like, ooh, I'd like to do that or this, and it's like, it's sneaky because it seems like it's safe TV.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I'm not going to see
such a
your
great.
stuff on there, but that is like
I couldn't have come up with that. That's amazing.
That is
Yeah, that's so real. So full
that,
disclosure.
that impacts me financially. That's
Yeah,
what I'm
oh,
saying.
yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
It's like, you know,
Oh,
it's taking the
absolutely.
dream, the focus of the dream off of where it needs to be.
Yeah. Yeah. So full disclosure from Nick and Natalie Morrill, I'll talk on her behalf, right? I have a house here in Anchorage that a couple of the sisters live in, right? I'm planning to sell that house. I got really excited when I saw what it could go for on the market and what I've paid down on the mortgage and all of the equity that I've built in that house. I'm like, yes, I'm going to sell this house. I literally sat down and I wrote a list of all of the things that I was going to buy with the money that I was going to get from this house, right? And then I read the Bible and I was like, oh my gosh, what the heck is wrong with me, right? Because nowhere on that list was helping anybody. It was a TV. It was retirement. It was all the stuff that seems nice and so like even responsible to invest in retirement. I get it, but dude, my heart was so far away from God as I wrote that list, and it's been so convicting to me to read the Bible and just be like, I need to do more, right? Or I need to change my priorities, right? It's incredible. Other thoughts?
I think kind of circling back to the start of this talk is thinking about how you can use your passions for service and compassion.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's great if you're passionate about the outdoors. How can you use that for service? Or how can you implement that into your compassion?
I agree with you completely. And it makes it, you get excited about that, right?
Makes it a little easier.
Yeah, totally. Easier, not the bad way, right?
Right.
We're taking shortcuts. It's not always a good thing.
No.
But when we go out and we're making it in that sort of realm, yeah, absolutely. That's huge. I think, we could talk. Obviously, getting out and volunteering is an amazing thing. Giving financially to causes that make a difference, that's a huge thing, right? I think making it a point to actually interact with people that are from different backgrounds. Now we're talking about, it doesn't necessarily need to be the poor impoverished person, but it could be, right? Or maybe it's someone that has different abilities or struggles with a certain disability or something that you're just not comfortable with, right? Interacting with those people, getting to know them and their stories that can help curb those assumptions and judgments that sometimes we have about people, right? Inviting somebody like this to your house church, or inviting someone like this to the larger church service. And this is great, right? Because the safety thing is that's a real issue, right? What if you had a conversation in your house church about that? Like, what are we, I mean, even if you arrive at a decision to say, we're not in a good place, we have all these kids, we want to be on the safe side, even if you arrive at a conclusion like that, how much better is your house church going to be having gone through that sort of conversation? How can we reach out more to the people? How can we have compassion on them? And if it's not inviting them into our homes during a Sunday service or a house church service, then what can it look like? How can we expose these people to God, right? What a great conversation, an uncomfortable conversation. That's awesome. I love that. I don't love that. That's a lie. But it's so good, right? And so it's, again, coming up with things like that. So I encourage you to write down thoughts, to really think, pray about these things. And even one thing that I don't want to forget, right, is the poor and the needy and the disenfranchised and the alone and so on and so forth, they're not always out here. Sometimes they're here. And so even serving within the family and making sure that those of us that are struggling financially, struggling, on the outskirts or whatever, that they're brought in, that they're taken care of, right, for the glory of God. So there's, again, if we just build this, so if we continue to work, go ahead.
No, you can finish your thought.
No, that was.
I was just
going to
going
go
to
into
say,
the conclusion.
I think it while it's important to make compassion and service a priority, it's also important to give yourself a break.
Yeah.
And like work into it. You don't have to invite a homeless person to come live with you, but maybe start by like going in, serving them a meal.
Totally.
And kind of go. I don't have to go, into the heart of the gangland, but I can go be nice to the guys on the
Anchorage
street.
gangland.
Yeah, like whatever. I think it's important to know that. I think sometimes we get, okay, I have to be compassionate and service, and what's the most extreme?
Yeah,
you don't
totally.
have to start
I'm with
there.
you. I'm
can
totally
start
with
with,
you.
you know what, if I can't go all the way to here, I can push my comfort zone to this point, and I can do that. And then you can, once you get comfortable doing that, you can push it a little bit further.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the easiest practical, right, to come away with, kind of on that note, right, what am I supposed to do about this lesson? The answer is something.
do something. It doesn't need to be something crazy. Do something. And as we build that compassion, we go after the ministry of Jesus in that way. There's lots of different things that we can talk about. But one thing that I'm sure of, Jesus and his compassion changed the world. Jesus and his compassion changed people. That's our call. We can do that as well. We can change our community. We can change our world. And again, all that will be for the glory of God. Amen? Amen.